Hey, I'm back, I think. Yeah, it's me. Looks like me anyway. No. Start the video, Garrett. Yeah. Alright, anti-bullshit man. Yay! No, that's right, he sucks. He really does suck. Leaving comments on heroin, church, crazy, insane videos, which is funny in itself. So anyway, he made some sort of comment like, paraphrasing, "Oh, ha ha ha, what a silly notion, this whole value thing, ha 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 ha. There's no real value in the universe, ha 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 ha." And just mocking the whole idea of the fact that somehow people get what they deserve, something like that, or should. And like that sort of makes intellectual sense. That doesn't have something to do with just raw emotion, that's somehow intellectually a valid statement. That somehow harm doesn't matter when it happens to assholes. And it's really just kind of, I mean, for an intelligent person not to realize that the only difference between them and an asshole is a little bit of understanding. And I sort of mentioned this in Stickham, but it's sort of the whole point. Like, he just misses the point of the Scrooge movie, which is it's just a subtle understanding, a subtle change in Scrooge's enlightenment. Just having a little bit of knowledge of the facts of the life of his Clark and the circumstance of his sister's death, and a couple of little tiny facts, and he realizes, oh, fuck, what have I become? Just even viewing himself in the past and seeing the difference between the monster he had become and the thing he was at one time. Just little pieces of information, and it totally, reforms the organism, reforms the person. And so, for anti-bullshit man, somehow there would be a point because that little bit of lack of information exists, somehow it's okay for that individual to suffer. Or that somehow all suffering in the world is somehow placeable in some sort of, like the world works that way somehow. Somehow there's some sort of karmic law, that it will somehow befall the right individuals, or in some proportion to the amount of crimes the human race commits, there will be a proportional amount of penalty imposed. And that somehow our obligation is just to make sure it all falls on the people who deserve to be in hell. And it's just so, it's a childishly immature perception of what the real battle here is for humans. There's lots of analogies I could give, metaphors. If you work with a chessboard, you can play with the idea of kings and knights and bishops, the elites versus the pawns, and that's sort of nice when you're doing some sort of bigger picture to the character of the players. But I think the checker analogy is more suitable to the fact that we are all just feeling beasties trying to make our way in the world, and that through little bits of circumstance we become things like alcoholics or drug addicts. We become greed obsessed because of some sort of insecurity we might have had as a child, being an orphan or something. There's lots of ways we become a jerk, or we become insensitive, or we become racist, or we become something. And subtle changes change all of that. And so in essence, if we're going to sit there and say there's going to be checkers that'll be kicked off the board, or checkers that'll be smashed and crushed, there's a certain irrationality to thinking that there's some sort of, first off, that there's any kind of proportionality, that the punishment fits the crime ever, or that it really matters in any sense. I keep trying to make the argument that I think the only rational way to look at harm and suffering is to see it as a plague, as an enemy. It's the enemy. It's not, It just doesn't matter who it manifests in. It exists. And it doesn't matter who suffers. Suffering is the enemy. Pain, anguish, torment. These things are the enemy. It just doesn't matter who's experiencing them. You could argue that if there was some educational value, that somebody learns a lesson to become a better person through suffering, fine. But we know most suffering, no one's learning anything from it except how to suffer. They're not learning a lesson. They're just being tormented. And that's the reality of the real world. There's no added value to most suffering. It's just all negative value. And it doesn't matter. He mocks this idea of saying it doesn't matter what conscious brain experiences it. It's the negative. It exists as a bad thing in and of itself. And deserve is nonsense. Especially deserve in a deterministic world. It's just ludicrous to be talking about it deserve as anything more, like I said, than like your daughter was raped and murdered. You would have such a emotional need for some kind of revenge, some kind of payback. But rationally, you could understand that payback would be just creating more pain. That it would almost be an insult to your daughter's suffering for you to impose more suffering. The suffering is the enemy. It's not, who suffers. It's suffering, period. Anyway, this idea of autonomy, and Jay Sounder just made a video, brought it up in the case of an island, person living on an island, this notion that there's any real value in being personally irrational, personally illogical, an asshole. Why should we ever have the right to do something irrational? I mean, it is kind of nonsensical on its face. Yeah, we often don't think circumstances are fair. But if somebody can draw you the rational picture that your obligation is kind of built out of the fact that no part of the game is fair. That if you can do something to undo an unfairness committed by somebody else and do it in a clearly productive way, where there is a world, the consequentialism, the consequence is a world with less suffering in it, it's only logical. I mean, the imperative is to be logical and reasonable, and you can't really make a defense in most cases of this idea that you have no obligation if somebody does something stupid and you don't have an obligation to fix it. Their suffering is going to be just as real. Whether they're stupid or whether they think they're smart doesn't make any difference. The fact that they suffer will be a fact, and it'll be a fact that it's bad. Like I said, it's just pure emotionalism to imagine the evil being punished. It's just nonsense. And especially when we have there's so many little metaphors, there's so much in our literature, this whole idea of reclamation. Shakespeare used it. Darth Vader, good example. Darth Vader, the day before he turned to the good side, there would be some point in torturing that Darth Vader. But the Darth Vader the day after, it would be a horrible, awful thing to torture that Darth Vader. It's notionally silly to think there would be a difference. Let's see, how else to explain this? But another part of this is these people keep claiming that the value can't be stated as a fact. You can't argue. You can't even argue, really. They're even kind of cutting off the argument. That value is a real property. That of the categories we fit in, of the descriptive things that we are, somehow our consciousness can't be something we describe. And certainly we can't describe the value element of our consciousness. That somehow those properties, even though we have personal, intimate, profound experience with them, they're suspect, because you can't put them in a jar and itemize those properties in some mechanical way. You can't bounce photons off of your feelings, that somehow your feelings don't exist, and they don't have any weight or substance, that all the character you know them to have by experiencing them somehow is negated, because we can't turn them into a material thing. They're only a property, a manifestation, a phenomenon created by, we know, the material arrangement. So when we have enough, I guess at some point we will actually have enough physical data. If humans were to survive 1,000 years, one might speculate that we would have complete computer models of consciousness functioning in the human brain. We'd have the mechanism narrowed down, the phenomenon well described in terms of where the molecules and the neurons and not neurons aren't moving, but the chemistry, the atoms, the elemental particles, would be able to diagram how this movement of particles creates this illusionary amphitheater in our brain that creates this powerful, dimensional perception that we call our consciousness. And the nuance, the property of feeling that is manifested through that mechanics, and the absolutely factual capacity of those feelings to have very intense, repulsive, and attractive weighting, very pleasant and unpleasant weighting. But again, it almost seems insane, really insane, to have to defend the reality of something so loud to my experience, so tangible to my experience, so I can feel my feelings. I can touch them. They're right here inside of me. They're speaking to me right now. My consciousness is talking to me, not just you. It's insane for me to deny that reality, and to deny it has a descriptive character, that it puts me in value states, in states of negative states and positive states, and that negative things and positive things create what we know to be value. It's a perfectly reasonable dissection of reality, perfectly necessary to understanding our existence. And it's just obnoxious for somebody to mock the idea of doing that simple logic, of accepting the fact that we're alive and conscious. How you doing? No, I don't know if there's anything else I have to deal with him. I mean, this is really the subject. You just want to say that value isn't really a discussion, and that somehow deserve is a discussion. Somehow, again, we'll go back to that justice word. Like there's some possibility of justice, that even fairness is really possible. There's so much infinite regression in the whole idea of even calculating something like fairness. Is fairness, if two kids weigh, different because of genetics, do we compensate for the road race? How many compensations are we going to make to create something fairness where we're really measuring the endurance of their legs, the endurance of their lungs, the endurance of their spirit or will? There's no such thing. There's no rational risk-reward scenarios in this reality. This isn't. Anyway, now I'm.